Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Barry, Season 4, Episode 6. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So I love that, obviously, all of last episode, we caught up with Barry and Sally's circumstances after the time skip. But now we're catching up with, NoHo, Hank, and Fuchs. I wanted to know, what their circumstances were going to be. So, first and foremost, let's start off with the Barry stuff. Barry has got in his head, hey, I have to go kill Gene. And he's telling Sally how to put a gun together really quickly so that if in case anyone ever comes here, she can defend herself. But for her, it's can't I just leave the safety off? It's no, I don't want John to get it. But it's John won't know how to turn the safety off. He's yeah, but boys instinctually know stuff about guns and cars, and I don't want him to hurt himself. It's well, honestly, you shouldn't really be doing this. Are you really doing this for our family, Barry? Or are you just doing this because Gene's the one that turned you in? Because for Barry, it's if we let this go down, this movie's going to get made. And Sally's well, we'll just move again. And it's yeah, but you can't move away from a movie being made. He's everyone's going to see it, which obviously is not the case, but it's yeah, just because you make this movie doesn't 100% mean that people will watch it. I think that's going to be the mess up thing, and it's going to be the interesting thing to see how they handle this in the show. Are we going to make it so that the movie actually bombs in theaters? It actually does terrible and no one actually goes to see it or something like that? It'd be interesting if that ends up being the final straw of the series finale ends up including yeah, the movie did terrible, no one watched it, and so it just gets buried or something like that. I mean, because obviously the storyline this episode is that trying to make sure the movie never gets made, so we'll see whether or not Gene succeeds into that, but we'll get to that when we talk about Gene's side of things. But I think Sally is right, though. It's this is Barry's disguising it as hey, I'm trying to do it for the right reasons. I'm doing it for my son because I don't want him to see our lives like this, especially because Gene's not going to tell the truth. I mean, every story is always going to have someone's bias to it. It's an unreliable narrator. You're an unreliable narrator, Barry, because we saw it last episode with how you changed up certain details and switched stuff around to make yourself seem better in your son's eye because you don't want to actually tell him the truth about your past. So that's also the thing. And he's oh yeah, Gene won't tell the truth. It's yeah, Gene won't tell the truth, but you wouldn't tell the truth either if you were in the same circumstance. So, and it's kind of staying on Sally for a bit with that. Now that Barry's gone, Sally's it's oh, you're kind of not the greatest mom in that regard. I mean, it's also yeah, but she wasn't the greatest person to begin with. I'm not saying she's as bad as Barry, but Sally has a long list of issues and they've just gotten compounded even more so over the year because she's miserable and she's settled for Barry and she's super unhappy and she's not there for her son, which he kind of latches more on so to Barry, I guess because of her own issues. And because it's not the life she wants, John knows it on some level because, it just seems he doesn't like Sally, It's just his dynamic and relationship just not the same as it is, between John and Barry. So I just, and maybe he's going on a little resentful of Sally, and the fact is, her resentment towards Barry and her entire life probably leaks and, floods, it kind of leaks off of her and everything else and kind of lands on John in that regard, and so he's young enough to not quite understand it, but also old enough to also still feel it and be traumatized by it. I don't know, it's just the way Sally was just kind of okay, here's this burnt grilled cheese sandwich. Oh, you don't want it? I worked pretty hard on it. You know what I'm going to do? You're up here sniffling on the table. I'm just going to pour you a little bit of alcohol. Here's your juice, and for you to pass out. Now, that moment where she's trying to get him off the couch, she's come on, go take a nap in your own bed. I was oh, dude, I feel that. Not the shitty thing of I know that people have done that, taken a little bit of alcohol to kind of calm their kid down or something like that. I'm not saying I've ever done it, but having to lug a little kid because they fall asleep somewhere and they're too stubborn and too tired to get up. I've had to deal with that with my youngest niece so many times when she falls asleep and you're having to wake her up because it's time for my sisters come to pick her up and she just refuses to get up. And so there have been times I've had to carry her to the car. It's so annoying. In that moment, I'm oh, dude, that's so real. But obviously not from the circumstance of, oh yeah, I poured alcohol for her to drink. It's just, so it's not the same, but it just that moment of trying to wake a kid up to sleep, it just reminded me of that. But as yeah. And then Sally proceeded to go to sleep in her own room because she's been drinking, so she's about to pass out. literally the disassembled gun, we can hear it hitting the floor and the bullet rolling. Then she wakes up when she hears some voices. Now that, it's hard to say what's real and what's not. Because now part of me is wondering, like, wait, was all of that in Sally's head? Did she, in, like, her drunken, like, anger, like, break the house down? Or, because it seemed like someone did ram into the house. At first I was like, what is that going through the wall? But I'm like, is that supposed to be the tire from that truck? Like, how much of that was actually real and how much did that actually happen? Or how much is just Sally, like, spiraling and losing her mind? Because John slept through the entire thing. And when she comes out the room, because there was that creepy scene, because I was on pins and needles, because she's hearing the voices. She comes out, sees no one. The door's unlocked. One of the windows is open. And then as she's walking, this, like, guy in all black is just standing there. Very reminiscent of, like, Barry doing similar stuff. There was that episode from, was it season 2? I want to say it's, like, episode 5, when he was in, the episode where he fights that dude, and it just turns into a whole, like, shenanigans-filled situation. Like, him breaking into the guy's house, like, wearing the ski mask and everything. It kind of reminded me of that. Obviously, Barry wasn't in all black, but it kind of gave me that same feel. But yeah, like, the door closed behind Sally when she went back into the room, and she's freaking out. And the guy's saying, like, oh, would you put my arm? I was like, wait, isn't that what the guy from last season that she killed said? I don't remember now. I'm like, that's why I'm like, how much of this is the real world? And she's like, hey, wake up, kid, wake up, kid. I'm like, what's going on? It's like reality and, like, her losing her mind kind of bleeding together or something. Because all we got was, like, John waking up, Sally sitting on the floor being like, Barry, there's a problem. You need to get back here. Now, the fact that she's calling him Barry, now, I don't know if John's going to be like, wait, who's Barry? Wait, is that Dad's real name? Like, what's going on? And maybe he's going to have, like, a million questions. And I don't know. So, now I'm wondering, is that the guy's... Well, because where we caught up in the story with Hank and Fuchs, they don't know where Barry is. They're just putting fillers out there. So that's why I'm like, who would know to come after Barry? It has to be a thing of someone that I really do believe that had to all be in Sally's head, but I don't know. But anyway, Fuchs is out of prison and tatted up to the gills. I was like, hey, yo. I mean, because back in episode 4, we did see that after taking, like, a beating from the guards and the warden, like, everyone kind of was like, yo, Fuchs has got mad respect. It's like, yo, that's the Raven there. So 2 of the guys that, like, were really like, yo, he's holding it down are now, like, 2 of his most loyal people. So I even love, like, the finger thing he's kind of got going. I was like, wait, what's that supposed to represent? Maybe that's something we're supposed to know, but it almost kind of looks like someone, like, twiddling their fingers like they're, like, strumming a guitar to some extent. Like someone specifically on, like, the neck of a guitar, but I'm probably reading too much into that. Like, maybe that means something else. Maybe it's something from the earlier seasons I should remember, but I don't. But, yeah, Fuchs is out, got his way to, like, a coffee place, started dating, like, the cashier or barista behind the counter, went to go see NoHo Hank. Ooh, the moment I saw the building's name being NoHo Ball, I was like, you combined your name with Cristobal, which is like, sweet, but also extra sad considering it's like, you didn't kill Cristobal, and you tried everything you could to stop it, but, you know, it is what it is. I even love him asking Fuchs, like, yo, what happened to you? He's like, yeah, I felt a lot of pain, and eventually that pain turned into pleasure. And he was touching his chest, and the whole Hank was like, no, stop it, I don't need to know all that. So, but Fuchs is back to being like, yeah, I'm anti-Barry. I'm like, someone else put it great. He is so flip-floppy this season. I think I even said it like, oh, he hates Barry. I love Barry. I hate Barry. I'm going to try and save Barry's life, and no, I'm back to hating Barry. So that's so interesting. So, I mean, to be fair, he's had 8 years to sit on this, and he blames Barry because it's like, yeah, I tried to save your life. You ended up busting out of prison, and you never came back to me. It's like, well, to be fair, he had to go on the run, so there was no helping anyone. But it's like, yeah, I mean, he was trying to screw everyone over, but even then, even when he was trying to screw over NoHo Hank and Cristobal and everything, once again, I don't know if that fully entailed screwing over Fuchs or not, but maybe it did. So I mean, once again, he was literally doing what Fuchs was originally planning on doing, but he bailed out. But Barry kind of tried to go through it all the way, but that kind of blew up in his face when the FBI agents ended up getting murked. So, but I love that. Yeah, like Fuchs and his guys are getting paid to be like the muscle and security for NoHo Hank. I don't think I think the business has gone legitimate. Building from the sand situation, he has legitimized it, but I'm sure like the checks are still getting their slice of the pie. Like we don't know how. Like to be fair, all of LA is supposed to be his, so they're probably back in the Czech Republic, like just doing their own thing. So it's probably a thing of like, yeah, as long as they get their cut of the pie, they're fine. So it's just kind of NoHo Hank's whole operation. And Fuchs, well, he also learned that Gene is back in town, how they're going to handle it. Well, NoHo Hank was like, let me handle that. So beyond that, we don't know. I mean, I guess that's just going to be Hank handling that because it's like, right, he's someone that also knows too much, so we need to remove him from the board, especially. I mean, I wonder does NoHo Hank and them know about the movie? Because obviously Fuchs makes a reference to like, hey, you hang with powerful people like actors and stuff like that. So word about the movie's probably gotten back to him, but probably like everyone else, they just assume Gene's here to make sure the movie goes through and he's trying to like take advantage of it and everything. So we get introduced to Fuchs' new stepdaughter. It's like, how long have you and this woman have been together for? Hours? It doesn't even feel like it feels like you picked her up at the place and then immediately came over to meet up with Hank. So you guys have only known each other a couple hours. He's like, oh yeah, I found love and I got a daughter. Oh, she's about to go to college. It's like, she's going off to it's like, oh, that's a pretty good college. And it's like, oh, great volleyball. I love that was NoHo Hank's contribution to the conversation was like, oh yeah, great volleyball team. And then it's just kind of like, oh man, look at all that you were able to build. You started from stupid sand and you built all of this. And all you had to do was like, oh, they have a special name for what he called, what was it called? The NoHo Hank standard, the NoHo sand, hourglass. The NoHo hourglass is what it's called. The tactic he used to kill all those people last episode that almost killed Cristobal. But then like Fuchs was saying like, oh yeah, we heard about it in prison and stuff like that. Yeah. Also about the fact that you killed Cristobal, and Hank took offense to that. It's like, no, I didn't do it. He's like, oh, you had to mince words with me. I know. We all know you did it. You killed NoHo Hank, and you took his idea. But Hank took offense to that because he didn't kill Cristobal. He tried everything in his power to try and save Cristobal's life, but Cristobal wouldn't listen. And it's like, I'm sure in Hank's mind, it's like Cristobal's actions got him killed. I had nothing to do with it. I tried to save his life. So now the deal with him is Fuchs is done because he's like, yo, you pissed me off trying to make it seem like because he already has plenty enough guilt over that. That means, like, obviously, he's done everything he can to probably work these past 8 years to bury that. And for Fuchs to, like throw that back in his face like that probably was just kind of like the last straw. He's just like, yeah, I'm done with you. I'm done with us having business together. So that relationship soured pretty quickly. I mean, to be fair, they've never had like a fully good relationship. Their relationship always ends up souring in some shape or form, whether it's like, hey, they plan on killing Fuchs because of Barry's mistakes or whatever the case may be. It's like, I don't think they've ever had like a solid stint of being in really good place with one another, Hank and Fuchs. I even love him being like, what the hell just happened? Like, I guess because he's so drunk, I have no idea. He just kind of screwed the pooch in that moment, but I guess he thought like, because for him it's like, Hank, you're this hardcore criminal. I can't believe you'd be able to do all this. It's like, yeah, despite all that, there's still that part of Hank that is kind of, kind-hearted and like has his shame and regrets about it because his attempt to be hard, to be the non-soft person that Cristobal called him at one point in time cost him the man that he loves. So he still feels the guilt, even if he hasn't said it, but it's basically him being like, no, it's not my fault, it's Cristobal's fault. He's the one that wanted it. He should have listened to me when I tried to save him, but it is what it is. So along with that, we are picking up again with Gene. Him and Tom go to see that executive from last episode, probably by Annie Chang. And they're so excited to get about the movie. They're saying like, hey, Barry's going to be the main antagonist. You, Gene, are going to be the hero. But surprisingly enough, Gene doesn't want anything to do with the movie. In fact, he's like, yeah, which this I'm sure is a larger conversation because it's been something that's really come to light. I mean, it's been probably a long conversation that's happened for a while, but I feel like it's really picked up more and more and more recent years about like adapting real life crimes into movies and TV shows. And that's why Gene's like, I don't want to have Barry, a psychopath, immortalized on TV. So you're like, on the big screen, you're like, yeah, that's been a conversation. They're like, don't take this trauma and everything and turn it into some some movie or TV show. I mean, that was why what Jim and Gene were supposed to be on the same page about beforehand, just so that they wouldn't use Janice's story like that. So once again, that's just kind of an interesting development. But like, Gene did not want anything to do with it. They're trying to spin it to him like, no. You can have say in what goes down, but for him, it's like, no. I just want Janice's like her to have some peace, and we're not going to do this movie. I'm going to do everything to fight it. But it's like, no. Warner Brothers is making this movie with or without you. He gets called in by the DA, who's like, okay, you shot your son and disappeared for 8 years because apparently he ran off to Israel in all of this time. So it's like, okay, so why didn't you come back to the DA or whatever? He's like, well, have you guys been able to find Barry? They're like, no, the last time we lost track of Barry 8 years ago and have no idea where he is. So he's also the one that got it in Gene's head of like, yeah, it's Marines that you have to worry about. They're the ones that kind of, when they're the ones you're dealing with, they're the ones that kind of come after you and seek revenge. He kind of put that in Gene's head, so he kind of screwed the pooch on that. So also, hey, what about your son? How does he react to you being back? Leo was a lot more welcoming. I guess it's just ever since him and his dad made up, he's been so willing to forgive his dad because it's like, hey, a psychopathic student of yours is trying to kill you. So he didn't believe it when Gene was like, hey, I'm here to kill the movie. He's like, yeah, sure you are. Even his grandson's like, yo, why is he here? It's like, go ahead, hug your grandfather. So it's like, how long do you stay? And it's like, well, I'm staying as long as you're comfortable. And it's like, once again, Gene is the narcissistic bastard that he is. Like, every time you think, hey, there's growth and change for Gene, he has a way of making you go like, oh yeah, you haven't changed. I mean, I think that's the beauty of this show, that it isn't just Barry. A lot of people have not changed. In fact, they've kind of doubled down on their bad behavior, their bad characteristics. And Gene's trying to say like, hey, I've become a different person. I'm better now, but who knows if that's 100% the case. So we'll see what happens in his attempts to try and stop this movie. And like I said, it's going to be interesting if the movie does get made and we find out that it is a commercial failure or something like that, because literally no one went to see it. So we'll see. But circling back to Barry, Barry's trying to find his opportunity to go and kill Gene. And I love the entire time he's listening to different podcasts because he is trying to live a better life. So he's dived into religion and stuff like that. He's become very religious. And I love that he's listening to all these different podcasts because he's trying to justify his actions, especially after Sally said like, oh yeah, committing murder is not really like, something you should be doing, which I forgot to talk about that line where it's like, either we do this or we might as well drop John off at an orphanage and then unalive ourselves. So, but he's going through all these different podcasts about like, right, one was kind of basically like, oh, let's talk about all the different sins. No sins are worse than others. And then it was like, unless we're talking about murder, then murder is like super, super bad. Barry tries not to listen to that. Finds another podcast that's all about like, oh yeah, like murders that were like, hey, God like gave the rights to like say like, hey, you can commit these murders. And Barry's like, that's all I need. That's all I needed. And he's listening to it more and more, but it was also saying like, yeah, but he was in his store when he got the guns and everything. I love the lady's like, yeah, we have to, when people are buying guns, we kind of have to show them this now, and it's pictures of like what guns can do to a body or whatever. I guess it's like the same equivalency of, hey, when you buy cigarettes, it's like almost well, I know I don't know if it's all of Europe or is it specifically the UK, but like cigarette packs come with like apparently like Though they come with like, hey, this is like lungs and stuff and what happens to them when you smoke. Was it like, didn't Gavin talk about that one time on like one of the RT podcasts? Didn't he talk about that? About that's like how like that's why the UK is a little bit better at like dissuading smoking. I think he said that. Maybe I made that up completely. Maybe I'm attributing it to Gavin or just the UK in general, but maybe I'm completely and utterly full of BS. Either way, it kind of had that same thing, and Barry's just kind of looking at the picture like, oh, okay, grabs his guns and leaves, but the podcast he's listening to is like, yeah, but unsanctioned kills not given by God are a terrible thing. So I was like, yeah, that's strike two. And so he listens to another podcast, which the third guy was it Pastor Nicky. I was like, no way. I was like, is that who I think it is? And the end of the episode confirmed it. I was like, you cannot convince me that wasn't Bill Burr. I was like, that sounds like fucking Bill Burr, and it super was. And I love that he was like, yeah, he was on like a hockey team and he ended up killing a guy or whatever. He's like, yeah, I went to jail for like 10 years or something like that. So for him, he makes excuses saying like, right, you just kind of have to wait for God to give you a sign. And Barry's like, well, that's all I need. Like, that was kind of like, he was just looking for any excuse to give him the leeway to do this. I mean, especially later on when Gene walked into the house, the door's wide open. It's like, dude, he's literally asking me to come in here and kill him. It's like God is giving me a sign of this is what I'm supposed to do, that I'm on the right path doing this. Once again, that's always been Barry's thing of always looking for some means and reasons to justify the terrible things that he has to do. I was like, oh boy, is he really about to do this? Is Gene going to turn around and shoot you this time instead of shooting his son? But nope, he gets grabbed with a bag over his eye. I was like, oh, it's got to be Jim. And Barry wakes up in the garage. I was like, there he is with Jim. How is this going to play out? What is this interrogation going to look like? Because Barry's never been on the other side of this. It's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening. I'm so excited to see where the next episode takes us. The next episode being the penultimate episode. It feels weird that it's like, wow, we really only have 2 episodes left. It's going to be so interesting to see what the penultimate episode, what goes down, what it sets up for the series finale. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.